Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Defending Jacob. Let's talk about it. So Defending Jacob is an Apple TV Plus series that is based on a book, and this has been airing weekly on the platform. They did initially drop the first 2 or 3 perhaps episodes in its premiere, but I have been watching along weekly as it's been released, and I have some thoughts. I have some thoughts about this show, and I can't wait to get into them with you guys here in this video. But before we dive into that, first of all, be warned that this is going to be a spoiler review of Defending Jacob. I am going to be going through all the nitty-gritty of this series. And second of all, before you get started on this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can catch new uploads. So now, without further ado, let's get into my review of this series. So first of all, I want to dive into the good. I want to dive into the stuff that I really enjoyed about this show, because I did find it overall, spoiler alert, to be rather enjoyable. I think one thing that really makes this show shine and really makes it stand apart is the way that it's able to build tension and suspense. It builds and it builds as the story goes along, and more layers upon layers of this story become unraveled. And I think that's what captures your attention and your imagination, because as the story goes on, there are more layers that are revealed, more secrets that are told, and it just makes for a very engaging murder mystery. And I think what makes that really work is one thing that I really enjoyed about this show, but also kind of hated, and that is the character of Jacob, because he is at the center of this murder mystery. He is a prime suspect for the murder of Ben, one of his classmates. Now, the reason why I have such a love-hate relationship with this character is because throughout the show, there's definitely tension that builds, because you never really know if Jacob is capable of killing someone, if he was the murderer of this classmate of his. And it's that tightrope act that Jaden Martell is able to play so brilliantly that always has this thought, this niggling thought at the back of our minds. Is this character capable of murder? Is he capable of killing someone, a fellow classmate no less? Because on the one hand, you want to believe that he is innocent and he's a 14-year-old kid. He would never even dream of actually taking someone else's life. But then on the other hand, you have this kid who is lacking in emotionality, and he is so apathetic and seemingly doesn't really care about anyone else other than himself. And even then, like in his own situation, he doesn't seem to have much emotion surrounding the entire case, surrounding the entire trial, which is huge. Considering how his mum is literally crying every single minute of the day. In comparison to that, like, he is just so apathetic, and so it leads you to question whether he could be capable of doing something as heinous as killing a classmate. And once again, this show does a great job of building that tension, because you have the layers upon layers that are revealed as the episodes go on. You see that Ben and Jacob's relationship was full of tension, it was full of rivalry and bullying even, and that just provides the police with motive for as to why Jacob would kill Ben, because they know that Ben was bullying Jacob, so perhaps he could have killed him in retaliation. And then of course you have the whole knife situation, which we're going to talk about that later on. But in the good part of my review, I will say that it did add, even more odds stacked against Jacob, which adds to the tension of the show. And I think it does a great job of building that once again as the episodes go on. And I think this is particularly key as well, because unlike a lot of the streaming shows that we get nowadays, this was not bingeable. We had to wait for this show on a weekly basis, and that definitely poses its own challenges, because you want to be able to retain the audience's attention as the weeks go on, but at the same time you do want to create a show that is bingeable along the line, because we know that the way that the Netflix shows, for example, that are bingeable are structured is specific to the way that they're going to be released. You know that they are designed to get you to click the next episode button without even thinking, or worse, they don't even allow you to make the decision to click it. They just automatically put on the next episode. You're like, oh, guess I'm watching the whole season of this show now. Thanks, Space Force. Whereas in the case of Defending Jacob, we had to wait because the show was being dropped every week, and so there had to be a sense of tension. There had to be a sense of, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next week, and I think the show achieved that pretty well. And similarly, the show also did a great job of exploring the mental state of the characters characters throughout the entire trial, throughout the entire court case, especially in the case of Andy, who is of course played by Chris Evans, and he is Jacob's father. He's definitely the character that gets the most spotlight, other than actually even more than Jacob himself, because the series is centered around Andy's journey as his son is going through this process of being a lead suspect in a murder investigation, and it's definitely about how he as a father reacts to all of this and the way that the world is seeing his son now. So I definitely think it was key to get into his mental state, into his psyche, to understand what is going on through his mind at this crucial, heartbreaking moment, terrifying moment even. And I think Chris Evans did a great job of portraying that. I will say though, just a little nitpick here, I'm not sure if I fully, like if we're talking 100% bought Chris Evans as Jacob's father. Not sure, okay? Now hear me out. I saw Gifted from like 2017 or 18, where he played an uncle who was the carer and guardian of this gifted child. And I think he did a great job there. I believed him as an uncle, someone who still has responsibility and still cares for a child and loves that child and wants the best for them. But at the same time, like, he's not a father. He's not quite... There's something about the way that he interacted with Jacob that I think, one, it felt like the characters hadn't really known each other for that long. He felt like Jacob's uncle, as in like Jacob's dad's, who happens to have been deceased, and now his younger brother is stepping in to help out the family. That's what I got from their family dynamic when it comes to Chris Evans's part in that family. I don't want to bash on his performance. I think he did a great job. It's just that you could tell the clogs working when he was trying to father it up. It didn't seem as natural. Whereas, and I'd like to contrast this with the actor who portrays Ben's father. Interestingly enough, he's dead for most of this series, so you don't actually see him interacting with his son. But at the same time, that father, he feels like a father. Maybe it's because he's older as well. I think because you're dealing with teenage kids here, it would have helped if Chris Evans was a little bit older, so that it would have been more convincing that he would have a teenage son. And I think he did a great job in the film Gifted, playing an uncle. He was great there. So it's not a case of me not being able to imagine him as anything but Captain America. It's just that in this case, I wasn't fully convinced of him being a father. But anyways, despite all of that, I will say that I did very much enjoy Chris Evans's portrayal of this character and the way that he was able to tap into all of the emotional turmoil that this character was going through, knowing that his son was potentially facing life in prison for murder. I can't stress this enough. These events were definitely an emotional roller coaster for this character, between having to worry about his son and having to worry about his wife and how she was mentally deteriorating as well. Not to mention the reintroduction of his father in his life, who was put away in prison years ago for murder and rape. Listen, J.K. Simmons, that was a nice surprise to see him here, but he was just so creepy. You could not trust him. Like, just looking at him made your skin crawl. J.K. Simmons did a great job in this role. He wasn't that prominent in this series, but you definitely got the sense that he was a lingering presence in the character of Andy's mind. And the role of the mind and the psyche and the psychology of each of these characters was a very prominent theme in this series, to the point where they even had a psychologist as a reoccurring character who was there to dive into Jacob's brain and identify any genetic markers that would make him predisposed to violent or aggressive or murderous behavior. And in the case of Andy, I think Chris Evans did a great job of displaying the emotional spectrum that this character would be going through in this difficult time. And whilst we're on performances, just in general, I will say that the performances in this series were solid. Everyone was doing great job in earning that paycheck. I especially enjoyed, of course, Chris Evans and also Jaden Martell. I did enjoy Michelle Dockery, although I did have a few issues with her character, not really with her performance of the character, but rather how the character was written, which we'll get into later on. The performances were solid all around. There was nothing really groundbreaking here, but I enjoyed them. I found them to be proficient, and I found them to be engaging enough to, again, keep that suspense and keep that mystery going on a weekly basis. All right, so now we're going to get into some of the things that I wasn't such a huge fan about when it comes to this series, and this is definitely going to be a more spoiler-heavy section. So first of all, I already talked about Jacob in my thoughts about how it's a positive that this character was so hard to read, because you're always left on edge as to whether or not he killed Ben. You always think that maybe there's a chance that he did, even when he's exonerated. But unfortunately, the flip side of that is that the character also becomes rather burdensome and annoying. I have this thing about annoying teenage characters where I can't. Listen, if we as teenage Jacob find ourselves in a situation where we are being investigated for murder, we are a prime suspect in a murder investigation, we know that our part, allegedly, the role that we have to play is not what they're suggesting. They're getting a lot of facts wrong, is what I'm saying. How about we talk to our parents? How about we talk to our father, who is a district attorney and who has worked on many criminal cases, many murder investigations? How about we talk to him? Please help me figure this out, because I do not want to end up in prison for the rest of my life for a murder that I did not commit. How about we do that instead of sitting there silently and keeping secrets? And I was so angry. I was so angry with him, because I'm like, why are we not speaking? Why are we not telling the full story to Chris? Talk to Captain America. There's literally no reason. There's no reason why it should have gone this far. He should be saying exactly what happened. The fact that you're on episode 4 or 5 and he's still like, oh, I forgot to mention this, I forgot to mention that. He's still making dumb decisions, which we'll get to in a second, right? Dumb decisions is a theme in this series as well. He's still making stupid decisions. He's still obscuring facts and things that could actually help him in his case. Like, he's still keeping secrets, which is just baffling to me. In a murder investigation, I don't care how much of a teenager you teenage, you will tell your parents everything. But the thing is, he's not the only one. He's not the only one acting a fool, because guess what? Everyone is making mistakes. Everyone's acting a fool on this show. His father, the district attorney or assistant district attorney, I can't remember which one, when he finds the knife, which, can we talk about that for a second? Pause. So there's a scene where he finds the knife, and he finds the knife that Jacob has, and it's like this, like, is he in a gang? It's like this scary, serrated, like heavy duty knife. And he finds that on Jacob, and they have this like confrontation where Jacob literally just stands there almost silently, and he's like all sulky and like, yeah, I have a knife. And his dad's like, why do you have a knife? And he's like shouting at him, and his mum's like, don't shout at him. I'm like, don't shout. Listen, it's because he doesn't have African parents. If it was my mum and she found a knife in my please, shouting would be the least of my concern. I just find it hilarious how whenever Andy tries to discipline their child or like gets angry with him, he immediately afterwards has to apologize. Like, I'm so sorry for shouting at you. I'm so sorry for... What? That is crazy to me. The fact that his son is a key suspect in a murder investigation, and they're finding all of this stuff out about him that is just so damning, and it's hurting his reputation and therefore his case. And Andy's just supposed to what? Like, just be chill about the whole thing? But he gets angry, and then he's like, I'm sorry for getting angry. No. Don't be sorry for getting angry. This kid has no idea. It seems like he has no idea. But anyways, that was just a side note. What happens next is even worse, because Andy, in his infinite genius, decides to take that knife, and he's afraid that his son might have actually committed murder, and that might actually be the murder weapon. So he goes and gets rid of it. He disposes of it. And that was just such a dumb move, because now the police find out about the knife. They know that Jacob was in possession of this scary knife that could potentially be the murder weapon, but they can't test it for prints or for DNA or anything because Andy has gotten rid of it. And it's like, again, you work in the law, like you work on cases like this. Did you not know that perhaps having the knife that you are so sure isn't the murder weapon as proof that it's not the murder weapon could come in handy? But instead, no, because in the back of his mind, he's like, but what if? What if it is the murder weapon? Which brings me back to the bad parenting, because listen, this is not a parenting video. Let me not get into it. Anyways, I just think that there were a lot of silly mistakes that the characters made in this show that just made it feel less intellectual and more convenient. Things just happened because they needed the plot to move along, and these characters were just acting out in ways that made no sense in this scenario. And finally, speaking of silly mistakes, this brings me to the character of Laurie, who, yes, definitely deserves her own section in this video because there is a lot to unpack here. So firstly, let's talk about the portrayal of the character herself by Michelle Dockery. I think she was pretty good in this series, but like I said, she wasn't given a lot of material to work with because for the most part, this character just cries. all the time. Like, she is just so depressed. Yes, that makes sense, but she's also just constantly crying. She's constantly passive and doesn't really interact and engage with the situation that she's in. She gets told a lot what to do and what's going on. And it makes sense because Andy and their lawyer, of course, is more knowledgeable when it comes to cases just in general in the legal field, but also especially murder investigations. It makes sense that she would then just receive that information and just kind of go along with whatever they say. But it also does create a character that just feels very passive and doesn't really feel like she can stand on her own 2 feet. And it doesn't help that the entire series she is crying. And it does become a bit frustrating because it seems like she lacks the ability to really stand and support her son and stand up for her son. Instead, the whole time she's questioning whether or not, just like us, Jacob actually committed the murder, and she is very, very sad about it. To the point where at the very end, she attempts to murder herself and her son, which is just... So before Jacob became a prime suspect in this murder investigation, Andy was also looking into this character called Leonard Patz, who was a convicted sex offender and a paedophile. Super creepy character, super weird. But Andy was sure that Leonard Patz was the one who killed Ben and not Jacob, although of course it's difficult to believe him in this situation because of his obvious bias. But Andy is so distraught, he makes the mistake of bringing up this other suspect to his imprisoned father, who's like, a paedophile to pin this on. Interesting. Especially in light of the story that Jacob wrote on this online forum, which is, again, I don't even want to think about it. So weird. So he writes this vivid and detailed story about killing Ben, even though he alleges that he didn't do it, and things aren't looking great for him. And Andy is at his wit's ends. Like, he's trying to figure out how he can help his son and how he can redirect this entire case to Leonard Patz. But of course, when Andy's father hears that Leonard Patz is another suspect, he takes matters into his own hands and has Leonard Patz killed by this guy called Father O'Leary or something, who's been hovering over Jacob's family throughout this entire trial just to protect them and keep them safe. And before he dies, Father O'Leary has Leonard write a confession saying that he was the one who killed Ben, that would therefore exonerate Jacob. And of course, when Andy finds this out, he is very distraught. He starts drinking. He's a mess. Like, he just can't believe that his father killed someone in the name of his grandson. I will say that whilst I did see this twist coming a couple of episodes ago, I did still think that it was executed really well. And I liked the fact that they kind of added in this gangster kind of mobster aspect to this story, because it's clear that Andy's father has a whole past, has a whole history, and that kind of ties into the current events in this series really well. Even though I do think it's rather convenient that Andy's father had access to a former mobster who could get the job done, but aside from that, I do think it was a pretty cool twist. But even considering how upset Andy was when he finds this out, that does not even begin to compare to Laurie's reaction when she finds out that her son was exonerated, not because he was innocent, but because Leonard Patz was killed and he was forced to write a confession. That completely destroys her, because now the suspicion is back and she's starting to ask herself, wait a minute, he wasn't innocent. Wait a minute, we don't know if he actually killed Ben. Like, how am I ever going to find out? And that's something that really just plays on her mind, to the point where she demands that Jacob tell her the truth and whether or not he killed Ben. But of course, in her troubled mind, the truth doesn't actually matter, because she's going to twist it either way. And you see that when she asks Jacob and he answers her that he did not kill Ben, and she doesn't believe him. And then when he says that he did kill Ben, she also doesn't believe him. So it's a lost cause. It's something that is going to turn on her mind pretty much forever, or at least for as long as she lives, which she's planning on shortening that time period ASAP, because they crash into a bridge. Suddenly, she veers off the road and crashes there. And it's heavily implied that that was intentional. And I think whilst I did enjoy the fact that there was that ambiguity as to whether or not Jacob did kill Ben after all, because it's revealed that Leonard Patz was forced to writing that confession, but to have his mum try to kill him all of a sudden, I think it just veered down the wrong path. Kind of like Laurie in her car. Just, I think I understand what they were trying to do in terms of linking in that psychological aspect and that genetic predisposition that Jacob could have from his mother, because he could only inherit the murder gene from his mother. And the idea that, I can't remember, did they test the mother? I think they did, but maybe they didn't. But either way, the idea that that could be inherited inherited from her because maybe she has the murder gene. But even aside from the murder gene itself, it was clear throughout the series that Laurie was going through a lot of mental distress and paranoia, and she was overanalyzing all of the things that Jacob had done throughout his life, and perhaps seeing if there were violent tendencies in him that could make him capable of committing murder. Like, she always doubted her son, and so it made sense that she would kind of break after finding out about the whole Leonard Pat situation. But to have her kill him, that doesn't make sense to me at all. And that was so unfortunate to me because already we had this pretty poor depiction of a female character. But just working off of their trajectory, this isn't where this character should have ended up. She should have ended up having a contentious relationship with her son, maybe never forgiving him or never trusting him. But to try and kill him, that makes absolutely no sense. And because of my feelings towards the final twist where it's revealed that Andy was being questioned in court by Neil because of what happened with Laurie and Jacob, and the fact that I didn't really love the way that that ended, it did kind of spoil the final episode for me, and it did make it feel a bit lackluster because it's kind of building, the whole episode is building to this event, and it just falls flat for me personally. Like, it definitely isn't the best episode of the entire series, which is a shame because the series up until now had done such a good job of building that tension and building that suspense, as I said before. So overall, I did enjoy this series and I found it to be very compelling. I liked the way that they revealed more and more layers to the story, and I liked the way that they planted certain things throughout the episode so that when the reveals did come, it made sense. Like, it didn't just spring out of nowhere. It was definitely very well thought out, but at the same time there were certain things that the characters did that did not feel very thought out at all. In fact, characters acted very stupid and counterproductive, which was very frustrating to watch, especially in such a tense environment already where one little mistake could end up with your kid in prison forever. And as a result, I'm going to be giving Defending Jacob a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Defending Jacob, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe so you can catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!